Hey everybody, this is Rykard here again, and welcome to another narrated Pokemon Wi-Fi battle. Today's battle, though, is going to be a little bit of a different style of narration, because rather than the norm, I'm actually going to do a play-by-play analysis of the battle that I have for you today, which is basically going to give you as much insight as possible onto the thought process that I was going through as I selected each turn in this battle. So if some of you are wondering why this video is so long, it's basically because I stopped to talk about a lot of things that happened in this battle, which I wouldn't normally do. Also, for the sake of making this completely educational, I'm not going to put any music in the background because I feel like that could potentially be distracting. So if you would like to be listening to your own music, I leave that up to you to put that on the background as you listen to my narration. But with that, let's just jump into this battle right now, and let's go through pretty much everything I thought about as I played my opponent in today's rarely used battle. So to start things off, I decided to lead off with my Primeape as my opponent led off with his Entei. Now I know that my Primeape, being Scarfed and seeing my opponent's team preview, is going to be faster than everything on my opponent's team. However, I'm going to freeze it right here just to point out something. Normally, Enteis in RU are physical because they can carry a very powerful Choice Banded Flare Blitz or a Choice Banded Extreme Speed and things like that. So at this point in the battle, normally I would go immediately out into Omastar to quad resist the Flare Blitz. However, this Entei is not the shiny variant, meaning that it cannot have those physical moves of Flare Blitz and Extreme Speed. So this means it's going to be a sub-combine variant. So rather than stay in and go for the super effective Stone Edge, even though I know I have it, I don't want to risk the miss and decide to U-turn immediately out into my Druddigon, because if this is a combine set, like I assume, and you're going to see right here is completely verified, this Druddigon will resist both the Lava Plume and the potential Hidden Power Grass that this Entei has. Now, the reason for not going to Omastar, obviously, is because of the Hidden Power Grass. It would be super effective against me. However, I see my opponent is behind a sub right here, so I am just going to continuously Earthquake this Entei. There's no reason at this point in the battle for me to switch out, so I'm just going to keep on doing this until he decides that he's going to switch. Now, I know my opponent does have a Rotom, which does pack Levitate, but once that Rotom comes in, I can handle it once that problem arrives, basically. So I'm going to keep going for Earthquake, but at this point my opponent realizes that my intent is just to keep going for it, so he switches out into Rotom. Now, even though the switch is bad for me because he obviously dodges my Earthquake, I also don't feel particularly threatened by this Rotom unless it has Hidden Power Ice. The only thing that it can do to possibly hurt my team is trick me. However, because Druddigon does have access to Sleep Talk, and I can also freely just lock him in on Dragon Tail without really worrying about anything, because the whole point of using it is to shuffle things around, I decide to leave my Druddigon in, predicting the trick, which is exactly what happens. So my Druddigon does get Choice Scarfed as my opponent does gain the leftovers, but it's not that big of a deal as I Dragon Tail him out into his Electivire. Now, considering my opponent's options at this point, I know immediately for a fact that my opponent is going to go for an Ice Punch on this Druddigon, because it obviously is super effective and going to do a lot of damage. However, under normal circumstances, if I was not Choice Scarfed, I would stay in and go for an Earthquake, because I know I can live an Ice Punch, and I know he would die from the Earthquake because he would take Life Orb and Rough Skin damage along with the damage from the Earthquake. However, because I am currently locked in on Dragon Tail, I do have to switch out to the next best thing to take a hit, which is my Dusknoir. Dusknoir also packs Earthquake to deal super effective damage to this Electivire, and Will-O-Wisp to potentially cripple its physical attack, so it seemed like a great switch for me. However, unfortunately, things don't always go as planned, and my opponent gets a freeze on my Dusknoir. Now, because I am frozen, my immediately thought is to just stay in at least one turn, try to thaw out, and hope for the best. Unfortunately, though, my opponent switches out into his Entei, and I do not get thawed out. And the reason why this is significant is because now my opponent is freely able to set up on this Dusknoir unless I get thawed. So, rather than risk getting thawed out immediately, I decide to go right out into my Druddigon again, because I know for a fact that even though I am Choice Scarfed and will lock myself in on one move, I can still take hits all day from this Entei because it only has Lava Plume and Hidden Power Grass. So I do just that as my opponent sets up a sub, and I'm freely able to just go for Earthquakes right here. Now, the reason why me going for Earthquake kind of stinks is that now, as soon as I go for this Earthquake, my opponent immediately will freely be able to switch right back out into Rotom. However, I don't know if that's exactly what he's going to do right here, so I decide that instead of go out into an obvious counter to Rotom, which would be my Galvantula, I don't want to risk him potentially staying in and going for another fire move, so I decide to go for a little bit of a different take on it, which is go into my Primeape, because I have U-turn on Primeape, which would deal super effective damage to the Rotom, and if it's also not what I intended him to switch out into, which occurs right here as he goes out into Sandslash, U-turn is still a great option because I'm able to now get out of the situation freely and go into a appropriate counter. Now the appropriate counter in this situation is going to be my Sceptile, because I obviously pack super effective grass type moves against the Sandslash. Now instead of going for a grass type move right away, I'm actually going to go for Substitute, knowing full well that my opponent has to switch out on this turn unless he wants to lose his Sandslash. And the reason for going for Substitute is that this is actually a subseeding Sceptile. And this is really great for me because now I am able to get behind a protective barrier to shield me from an attack on the following turn as my opponent switches out into Rotom to potentially resist the predicted grass move. Now because this is a subseeding set, I do also pack the Hidden Power Fire to be super effective against grass types that would be immune to Leech Seed, which is exactly what I do right here, and it does a significant amount of damage to this Rotom as he breaks my sub. Now like with the Sandslash before, if my opponent wants to stay in, he will lose his Rotom because I'm obviously going to KO it with a super effective Hidden Power. However, because I think my opponent might actually switch out, even though I can get the kill on this turn, I'm going to take a little bit of a risk and decide to go for Substitute anyway, which turns out to be great for me because my risk pays off as my opponent actually does switch out into a Slowking to resist the potential Hidden Power Fire. Because Slowking is in now though, I actually have a few options. I have a super effective Giga Drain which will do a ton of damage to the Slowking, or since I'm already behind a sub, I can safely go for Leech Seed. And because my opponent has been switching around to save his Pokemon this entire battle, I assumed that he was going to switch on this turn to not lose his Slowking. So I decided to go for Leech Seed, which still isn't a bad option because I do get a significant amount of HP back on the following turn due to leftovers and the Leech Seed recovery as my opponent breaks my sub with Psyshock. However, again, because I am at a completely advantageous position right here, I am free to just go for another Substitute with no worry as to what is going to happen because the Leech Seed is already up and I can recover health all I want. As he brings in his Rotom though, I'm already behind a sub, so at this point in the battle, I am freely able to now KO this Rotom with my Hidden Power Fire. Now this Rotom going down is extremely significant because now I am freely able to lock my Druddigon in on Earthquake if I want to, because he no longer has a Pokemon that is immune to it because of Rotom's Levitate ability. So that is something to just keep in mind as we proceed on with the rest of the battle. But either way, right here he decides to switch out into his Entei to obviously deal super effective damage to my sub and break it, and also be resistant of either my Hidden Power Fire or my Giga Drain. However, because I am already behind a sub, I am freely able to Leech Seed this Entei, which is great for me because I'm now able to slowly wear this Pokemon down with Leech Seed damage and also get back up to full health as my opponent breaks my sub with his Lava Plume. Now even though I know I can stay in here all day and proceed to subseed this Entei, I figured at this point it would actually be more beneficial for me to switch out into my Dusknoir. For one, I'm already frozen, so if he wants to keep going for Lava Plumes, he could potentially thaw me out. And two, I've already taken a little bit of damage in battle, so if he stays in, I can get some Leech Seed recovery and recover a bit of my Dusknoir's health. So I decided to do just that, but unfortunately my opponent also does not want to stay in either and goes out into his Electivire. Now even though I am frozen, I'm still not particularly threatened by this Electivire because Dusknoir is so defensive. So rather than switch out, even though I am frozen, I decided to stay in one turn just to see what this Electivire wants to go for. Turns out that he opts to go for Wild Charge, which does a bit of damage to me, brings me down to 97 health before leftovers, and it also shows me that he wants to obviously go for his strongest move. So me now seeing that he wants to keep going for electric moves, I decide now this is the perfect opportunity to go out into my Druddigon to take the Wild Charge, also have him take recoil from that move as well as rough skin damage, and the Life Orb recoil as you saw right there. And since the Ice Punch is all too obvious on the following turn, rather than sacrifice my Druddigon to die, I decide to actually bring in my Dusknoir again to have that be my death fodder for the turn. It's at a low range of health, it's frozen, it's pretty much not going to be doing anything for me for the remainder of the battle. Now I do live this Ice Punch, which I guess is kind of cool because it allows me to get a little bit more Life Orb recoil on this Electivire, but it's not going to be that big of a deal. I have a ton of things faster than this Electivire, and my Dusknoir was just brought in to faint anyway. So it faints right here, and I have a few options to bring in. I decide that I just wanted to bring in Galvantula right here, so I decide to bring that in and go for the Bug Buzz to take out this Electivire. Galvantula will always outspeed Electivire unless it is Choice Scarfed, so I knew that was the safe bet right here. Now because my opponent didn't see Life Orb recoil on this Galvantula, at this point he's probably assuming I'm Choice Scarfed or Choice Specs as opposed to what I actually am, which is Expert Belted. So he brings in his Entei to resist the Bug Buzz. However, I'm freely able to switch up moves, so my opponent makes a bad call right there, and I'm able to actually just go for Thunder right here and easily take out this Entei, which gives me a pretty significant lead at this point in the battle. Now with Sandslash coming in, I do have to weigh my options a bit in this situation. I do have a super effective Giga Drain, which could deal significant damage to the Sandslash. However, because of it being basically at full health, I don't think it will KO, and I don't want to lose my Galvantula in the process. I can't go out in a Primate because that isn't remotely of a favorable matchup at all. Druddigon will be useless because if I bring it in, it'll just get 2-hit KO'd by whatever Sandslash goes for, and I don't want my Sceptile coming in and taking any unnecessary damage that it doesn't have to take because that'll hinder its ability to subseed later in the game. So I decide that going into Omastar is actually the best option here because it is the thing that I need the least at this point in the battle, and it is also the thing that could take a physical hit or the best out of everyone else left. Now I know there was a threat of him going for Earthquake right here, but because Galvantula was in there right there, he wanted to go for Stone Edge to deal super effective damage to that and potentially take it out. But since I was able to actually bring in my Omastar safely, I figured I could just stay in on the following turn. I know I can take an Earthquake, and I know I can also deal a lot of damage with Scald. So since I initially brought in Omastar to just die anyway, I decided to do just that, but my opponent decides that he's going to switch out into Slowking to resist the water move. But fortunately for me, I actually get a burn with the Scald, which is going to hinder this Slowking's survivability for the remainder of the battle. But since I don't actually feel particularly threatened by Slowking, I'm actually going to stay in here and go for a layer of spikes just because I can. There's really no reason for me to switch out right here, so I see this as a perfect opportunity to set up entry hazards as my opponent goes for the Thunder Wave to potentially cripple my Sceptile, which he might have been thinking was going to come in on that turn to hit Slowking for super effective damage. But thinking ahead, I realized that I actually have nothing on this Omastar to hit the Feraligatr on my opponent's team if he wants to bring that in. And me thinking from my opponent's perspective, seeing that I now have a paralyzed wall that doesn't really have a move to hurt Feraligatr, this would be the perfect turn to bring it in. So rather than leave Omastar in, even though it isn't threatened by Slowking, I actually switch out into my Druddigon here for a couple of reasons. The first is that I would obviously resist a water move from Feraligatr, being a dragon type, and the second is that if he sees my Druddigon in, he's not going to set up a Dragon Dance because I could just Dragon Tail him. So I'm basically forcing my opponent to go for Ice Punch right here to take out my Druddigon instead of set up, which could have proved to be a very big problem for my team if he was able to do that. But with my Druddigon now dead, I'm able to freely bring in my Sceptile, which is going to easily be able to KO this Feraligatr at this range because I am packing a super effective Giga Drain that is going to do a ton of damage to this Feraligatr. And at this point in the battle, my opponent only has two Pokemon left, which is the Slowking and the Sandslash. And seeing as Slowking came in first, I know that the threat of Thunder Wave was very obvious here, so rather than just go for a Giga Drain, I decided to go for Substitute right away just to make sure that I would be able to be behind a protective barrier to dodge the Thunder Wave and also be completely safe from any attack the Slowking or the Sandslash wanted to go for. Now I do get a crit here on this Giga Drain, but it's not that big of a deal because I would have just been able to 2-hit KO it with Giga Drain anyway, and all he has left now is the Sandslash, which I can easily Giga Drain from behind the sub to take it out and give me the victory in this battle. So, that's pretty much how this battle played out. I hope you all kind of enjoyed this play-by-play narration. It might be something I do again sometime. So let me know in the comments what you thought of it. I'm really interested to hear feedback on this because this is something I've never done before, and I feel like not a lot of other people have done before either. So I'm kind of curious. I feel like there's a lot that goes into the thought process in this game that a lot of people really don't think about when they're playing it. And I just try to basically enlighten you in this video on some things that I think about as I battle against the various people that I do online or on Showdown or anything like that. So that is pretty much it for this video, everyone. As always, take care, goodbye, and I will see you all next time.